Hey, Closet Busters, come on and gather around. It's time once again to kick down those closet doors of life. We're here to escape our BS, explore our fears, and elevate our self-expression. I'm your host, Rick Clemens, bold move expert and coming out coach, and I'm going to take you to the party, the pulpit, the wake, and back to the party of living your life uncloseted. So come on, grab hold of yourself and get ready to step out, step up, and step into living your truth as we explore more stories, tips, and tricks for living your life uncloseted. Now let's get to the show.
Hey, closet dwellers and bold move makers. It is time once again for Life Uncloseted. And you know what? Today it's going to be all about parenthood and choosing. And I know that may sound like, okay, what are you talking about, Rick? Well, it's because, you know what? Sometimes becoming a parent is a choice. And then sometimes it's an unexpected surprise. But when you finally decide, you know what? I'm going to become a parent and there's no time like the present. You just make it happen, even if you're like a 30-something and finally realizing it's either now or never. I'm single and I'm considering starting a same-sex relationship. What am I, crazy for moving all this into place at the same time? Well, yeah, that's kind of what happens. So then you make that crazy decision and you start getting all the fake smiles of support of, oh, well, good for you, while people are muddling under their breath of, what, are you crazy? Are you stupid? Blah, 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 blah. And then you realize, nope, this is my choice. And that's what we're talking about today with Emma Brox, who is the author of a great book that I have been literally laughing at, just loving so much. And I just told her before we came on the air, this is going to become mandatory reading for my two daughters. Her book is an excellent choice, The Panic and Joy on My Solo Path to Motherhood. And what a better way to come out of the closet, live life on your terms, than to interview Emma. And I'm so excited you're here, Emma. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for such a fantastic intro.
Oh, you bet. So as I said, I've really been enjoying this book, and Emma and I have some things in common because we both have two daughters. Of course, mine are like on the other end of the spectrum, almost like self-sustaining, and hers are, well, pretty much mommy needing at this point. But, and we both are, well, we're kind of the same-sex people that were in same-sex relationships or have been attracted. So we got lots of interesting stuff to talk about. So why don't we just dive in? So this whole motherhood thing, and I'm going to try to ask questions that maybe haven't been asked before, but when did you know, like literally in your life, that motherhood was like, this is the thing I really want? Was it early, late in life?
I think it's so hard to unpick, because the honest truth is that I feel like I was conditioned in my own childhood to want this thing. Yep. But I was simultaneously being conditioned to understand that I should aspire to more than my own mother's life. Even though my mother was a happy person and she adored being a mother and she loved me, she had left school at 16. She never had a career to speak of. And I grew up in the 80s when everyone's mother was trying to raise their daughters not to have that life, without putting them off the idea of having a family. So I sort of grew up assuming that at some point I would do what my mother had done and have a baby, but I always kicked it down the road. Like everybody I knew, all my female friends were like, yeah, one day. Right. And then in that incredibly embarrassing, cliched way, I got to 37 and out of the corner of my eye for the first time could see 40 coming over the horizon. And I just freaked out.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't even want a kid right then. It still felt to me like a hypothetical. But I started to realize that from now on, the longer I left it, the more it would cost me to make this thing happen. And that was very focusing.
Well, and not cost you only like financially, but physically and everything else. I mean, I can relate to this because, you know, I didn't come out and give birth to a child, but my wife and I, I was late 20s, early 30s when we had our first child. And for us, people were like, when are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? When are you going to do this? I'm like, it's not on the horizon. And then one day it kind of was on the horizon. And I had always wanted kids, but it wasn't like, let's go make this happen. You know,
right. It's like a background assumption.
Yeah.
Without you having to do anything, it'll take care of itself.
Yeah, it'll take care of itself and it'll show up. And yes, in our case, it did just show up. It's like, oh, guess what? We're pregnant. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I think I was more excited than my wife in many ways, because I immediately, like, as soon as I found, I'm like, okay, let's see, the second bedroom, we're going to start this. And he's like, calm down, boy, calm down. So, but as you started to step into this, I'm sure like many of us, you started getting all sorts of advice. And I know a lot of this comes up in the book about, here's what this person's saying, this is what this person's saying. And then, of course, you went through the in vitro pathway. So that must have been like everybody had an opinion.
Well, yeah, and everyone is sort of frantically trying to justify their own choices, not in ways that are necessarily overtly hostile or even conscious, but, you know, those of my friends who were happily without children in their 40s were saying, well, maybe you could wait a while. What you said in the introduction was exactly right. And it's funny, I haven't heard it articulated that well before, which is that superficially, my very, very liberal circle of friends were like, yeah, you go girl. But I just knew that behind that, there was a different conversation going on.
Exactly.
Like, she cannot possibly be thinking of doing this, you know, and it wasn't even, as for me, it wasn't even as straight cut as having a baby on my own. I feel like you can sell that to people quite cleanly. Because they understand, but it was messier than that. I was in the very early stages of this same-sex relationship, and so my committed lesbian friends who were married felt that by not wanting to do it with my partner, I was being homophobic. Is it just because you don't want to be two mommies? Like, you know, so they were upset, and then you know, anyone who was in a couple didn't understand why I would choose not to hang on to the life raft of doing it with somebody else.
You know, that's an interesting perspective. I never, you know, until you just said that, I didn't think about it. And it's interesting because I've been around many gay and lesbian couples who've gone down this path, but I've never thought about, so what if you are just starting this whole relationship thing and you're already on the, you know, parent track? And that's your decision, but then you kind of bring somebody else into it. Gosh, people are going to throw some big stones at that. It's like, wait. You're supposed to this is the construct that we all know. This is what we've all been told. This is how you do this, which is such bullshit to begin with. But I didn't think of that.
People get very cross and it's funny, it just made me sit down and question all of my assumptions, one of which, everything that had been sold to me, which is that, you know, the appropriate motivation for having a baby is supposed to be as an expression of love for the person you're dating. And that just wasn't where I was coming from. It's like, I want a baby for reasons that have absolutely nothing to do with the person that I met 3 weeks ago. How could they? So it seemed to me that the relationship and the baby desire were utterly separate things.
That is so interesting.
For as long as I could. And then,
so did you get this, and I know, you know, gay men, we kind of have our interesting little tribal stuff, and lesbian women have their little interesting tribal stuff. Did you get this mostly from your lesbian friends, or was it kind of coming from anybody who kind of has looked at the parenting track, been in the parenting track? Was it like coming from everybody, or were there certain segments of people?
I feel like lesbian high command was particularly displeasing.
Yes, there is a high command. And I love my lesbian sisters, so those of you who are listening, please understand that I love this, but there is a high command. Yes.
I had several uncomfortable dinners with good married lesbian friends of mine who were cross-questioning me every which way, but why don't you move in together? You know, what are you doing? And the unspoken accusation was that what I was doing was an expression of unstated, internalized homophobia, which is crazy. But I'm willing to accept that there's a possibility that somewhere in my system that exists. But I honestly thought that there were problems that came above that, which was that I was just not suited to live with this person. It was nothing to do with what people were saying.
Well, that's so interesting, because one of the most interesting things that happened to me after I came out of the closet, which everybody who listens knows, and you got a little preview of this, that I came out late in life. My daughters were 5 and like 9 months old when this all started to unfold for me. And I actually had people say to me, oh, you're never going to find a partner, because who wants to date a guy with kids, or who wants to become instant daddy duty without? And I'm like, really? You're just bursting I think I'm just gonna go back in the closet right now, you know, because it's like, wait, but I know this is who I am and all of this stuff. And it's all their projection. I mean,
and it's not true, right?
It's not true.
It's nonsense.
No, I think so many people want the experience, and some are going to do it this way. Others are going to do the way you're doing it. Others are going to be a couple and they're going to decide to have kids. And, guess what? Parenthood is whatever you want it to be, and tell the naysayers to go bye-bye is my opinion. But
sure, I agree. But I mean, what continues to fascinate me is that we're also defensive of our own choices. It's crazy that we still feel somehow undermined by the fact that somebody else does it differently. Especially women, I think, because I think women particularly value themselves and are valued according to the personal choices that they make.
Of course, especially for women. I think it's that personal choice stuff. It's like, oh, well, look what she did. Let's see, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is where she falls, right?
Yeah, how much do I suck?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, one of my good girlfriends who we used to speak on PFLAG panels a lot together. And her wife did in vitro, and Angie's actually been on the show. Angie harvested her eggs right when they met. And she knew she was approaching for her. She goes, I want to harvest my eggs just in case. And she goes, I'm pretty sure that Jill's the one I want to do this Parenthood thing with. And she tells the stories about how friends were like, really? Why are you doing this? This isn't like ordering a cocktail. It's like, she goes, they're like, you're going to save your eggs for her? What if this doesn't? She goes, no, I'm harvesting my eggs for Parenthood.
Yeah.
And I actually happen to think it's going to be with this one. And that's exactly what happened. So they harvested Angie's eggs. Jill was actually the incubator, let's just call it that. And then they had a donor. And still people are like, well, that's just kind of weird. Because I'm like, oh my God, people, get over this crap. They had a baby. They love the child. She's a great kid, and it's so interesting to watch.
It's weird. It's everything about it is weird. The entire baby having and raising business is a complete,
Oh, it is. It is
mind melt. Well, I have a question for you. Yeah. Actually, I'm curious. Do you think that if you had come out much earlier, you'd have gotten the juice up to do it in the context of a same-sex relationship? And
absolutely. I know I was destined to be a parent. I know in my heart of hearts that that's where I would have ended up. And I got really lucky that my husband, who I met about 3 years after I came out, he was really in the parent mode too. I don't think he realized it as much until, we got together. And then, he's been in my girls' lives since they were like, 6 and 2. So, it's been a really beautiful thing. But yes, I know hands down I would have taken the parent route somehow, some way. And I'm not just talking 4-legged parents. No, that wouldn't have worked for me. I need the 2-legged ones that poop in your face and all that other stuff. That's the other hilarious thing, is that there's this strand of commentary which, when I think gay and lesbian or any kind of alternative family structure is presented to them, say, why didn't you get a cat? And it's like, listen, I've owned cats and I've had children, and those two are not the same things. It's not like you go into the store and go, let's see, cat, dog, fish, child, cat. Exactly. This isn't how it's done.
Yeah.
No, I don't have the same feelings for my cats, God, let him rest in peace right now, as I do my child. It's like, no, that isn't the way it works for me. And I always find it interesting, the ones who don't have children go, well, that's interesting. I'm like, okay, explain the word interesting here. What are you getting at here? Because there's something in there that for all of us as humans that we make those judgments. And then again, it really has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with them. So I'm curious, what is the thing that's surprised you the most about yourself as this parenting thing has taken off? Because I know I could go for a whole hour on all the now 23 odd years into being a parent, but at the beginning, there were a lot of things that surprised me about myself that I discovered.
I have to say, before having had children, I labored under the delusion that I was a relatively even-tempered, rational human being. And it has been utterly horrifying to discover that I'm actually a screaming banshee with the shortest fuse in the world. I mean, I have been moved to rage in ways that, on a daily basis that wouldn't have touched me before I had kids. And that, in some ways, that it is horrifying, but it's also incredibly liberating to be released from that delusion. So
this is a true confessions moment here. Nobody has ever heard this. I don't think I've ever shared this with anybody. I still remember when my first daughter was born, and she couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old at the very most. And I remember one night in the middle of the night, she was just wailing and crying. We'd already fed her and everything, and she was just quieting down. We were all just starting to fall asleep, and she started in again. And I told my wife, I'll take care of it. And I went into her room, and under my breath, I'm like, if you don't shut the fuck up, I'm going to beat your ass to death when you're 5 years old.
I mean, I hear you.
And it's like, wait, who is this man? I don't recognize this guy whatsoever, because it's like, oh my God. And then it's interesting because throughout the years, there's been other times that suddenly, okay, it's like I gave myself permission to say that under my breath. Yeah. And then throughout the years, there's been times that I have literally said to my kid, all right, I'm done with this. And I'm like, oh my God, I know for me where it comes from is this is the modeling that I saw in my father.
Right.
And it's like, okay, I need to erase this really quickly. And I say to my kids all the time, because they get my dad really well. And I'm like, anytime you see me acting like grandpa, I need you to call me on it. And they do.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting to watch that stuff. But yeah, the great, crazy, raving banshee part, I can totally identify with. It's insane.
It's shocking, isn't it? But I feel grateful to be more in touch with the entire spectrum of my nature rather than...
Well, yeah, because I think this is, I don't want to go clear down the woo-woo path, but to me, this is when you really see yourself. This is where that whole consciousness and awareness stuff that, we all... Well, not all of us. There's certain people in the White House that don't.
It also, I mean, I don't know. I go back and forth on this, whether parenthood has made me a better person or a worse person, and I guess it's neither. But I think it has made me more tolerant of everybody's shortcomings, because you have to, in order to give yourself a break. You have to extend that outwards. The idea of the idea that we're all sold that we're kind of groping our way towards the curation of a perfect life is just hilarious. I mean, 2 minutes in and you're just like, okay, well, that's not going to happen. Right.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting about parenthood to me is the things that become so huge and then a day later it's like, I don't even remember what was so huge yesterday, because now there's something else that's so huge, and each day is a new thing of, okay, that thing. In fact, my daughters pulled this on me not long ago. They're like, so my oldest one was probably in fourth grade, or third grade. My youngest one was in kindergarten. They went to the same elementary school. We're sitting at, dinner 6 months ago and having conversations about what it was like for them when I first came out of the closet. And my youngest one, who's just tell it like it is, no bullshit. She's just going to say whatever comes to mind. She goes, oh yeah. She goes, I used to get so mad at Shelby when we were at school, and she'd say, don't say anything about dad being gay. We don't want to talk about that. I'm like, what? Where did this come from? Yeah. And I'd never heard it before. And then we had a great conversation about it. But it is that awareness and that interesting stuff that starts to crop up that you go, oh, okay. Now I got to learn from this too. But
it's terrific that she can bring that up. I mean, that's the environment you want to create, right? Where all of this stuff can be just.
Well, yes. And I think this is where I believe same-sex parents or even transgender parents, done right, give their children the leg up.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Because they are going to go into the world with an open mind. Now, here's the caveat to that. Those of us who come out of the closet from previous heterosexual marriages, you kind of have to have the other side of the equation doing the same work. They can't be, bashing you and saying what a son of a bitch you were for coming out, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
But I think done right, the same-sex parents give their kids this beautiful gift of here's what empathy, here's what tolerance, here's what acceptance really looks like, here's what rejection can be like. And God, it equips the kids with so much. I mean, my kids, my 2 daughters, nobody gets away with pulling crap on them. They will stand up. They will say, this is how it is. They don't, my oldest daughter goes, okay, I'm going out with the gays tonight. I'm like, okay, great. We're off to go wine tasting or have a cocktail or something. And she'll be posted on her Instagram feeds and everything. I'm out with the gays tonight. I'm like, okay, I love it. But, hey, your dad's okay. You can call it. So one of the things that I found so humorous in some of the stuff I've read in the book and then some of the bios and stuff was this juxtaposition for you with the healthcare in the US versus the UK, because I used to work in the UK, so I have some understanding there. But why is this such a just complete mess? And especially for someone like you, it's like, okay, here I am now, I'm doing this, and oh my God, you're jumping through hoops. What does that whole mess look like from your perspective?
Oh my gosh, I'm still not over it. I mean, I have to say, I think I could live here for the rest of my life and I would never stop being unnerved by the way you guys do healthcare.
Oh, it's insane. It's just insane.
It's insane, but not even just the money, although that is 90% of it, but just to anyone who's grown up under socialized healthcare systems in Europe, the idea of being given a choice in the matter is really frightening for us, because to me it feels like I'm being asked by my airline to choose a pilot, and it's like, you know what, I want you to make that choice because I do not have sufficient criteria to make this choice.
Exactly.
And that's what it felt like when I came here and I was shopping for a doctor. I mean, how do I know? I have no idea. I don't want to look at spreadsheets and try and figure out this guy versus this guy. And in any case, it only ever comes down to who your insurer will approve. But it just goes against the grain of everything we've been taught. Like, you grow up in Britain, and the healthcare, the NHS is not perfect by any means.
Right.
But you grow up in Britain with understanding that you are not a consumer in a marketplace, that this is a birthright, that everyone has, at least notionally, the right to be taken care of from the cradle to the grave.
Yep.
And you come here, and of course, that is not the message. The message is you're on your own.
Yep.
And if you can afford it, then great, good for you. And if you can't, I'm sorry, you suck. And it's insane. And particularly in the fertility world, I mean, I became very ambivalent about it because fertility is an elective area of healthcare. Actually, if you have the money available, I'm sure I ended up getting a much better level of treatment in New York than I would have done in London, just because the free market here and the level of competition between fertility doctors in New York means that it's just a much higher level of service. So I'm a beneficiary of a thing that I deeply disapprove about.
Yeah.
The fact is, I wouldn't have had twins in London. There's no way I would have been medicated to the extent I was, because my clinic in New York was completely results driven.
Yeah.
So to them, twins was like, hey, high five.
Yeah.
So
what was that to you when it was twins? Was it the high five, or was it the, oh shit, now what?
Well, I mean, it was, thank God, because a week earlier it had been quadruplets. So which by the way, did not faze my fertility doctor at all. He was completely chilled about this because it probably happened every week at that clinic. Yeah. And he said, this happens all the time. A few extra fertilized for insurance, and they tend not to work out.
Right.
And then sure enough, 2 of them just evaporated in the first week. And then I was left with twins. At which point it seemed to me, compared to quadruplets, like it was the bargain of the century. So I was like, only 2. I can definitely cope with that.
Oh, I don't know how you can cope with that, because I have 2 and they were 4 years apart. And it's like, okay, it was like, I guess I can compare it to, it's either the sprint or it's like the relay. And I feel like I've been living the relay. It's like, okay, they're 4 years apart, so this one gets done with this. Okay, we've already been through this, now we get to go do it again. And in your case, and I have some good friends who are actually friends of my youngest daughter, who they have twins. They have a boy and a girl. And so we've kind of watched them grow up. And I'm like, I don't know how you do it. It's
insane. And you're right. That's exactly the analogy. It is like a sprint. So adrenaline gets you through.
Yep.
And, Milky Ways. And Toblerone is the thing that's keeping me going right now. And the thing is, the upside of it is, apart from the fact that I adore both of them to the ends of my soul, but it's the fact that I am relieved of the burden of thinking it can be perfect, because it is such a shit show most days, and not in bad ways particularly, but I think if I had one, my instinct would have been to helicopter and to have been over anxious. And, I would have worried as a single parent with an only child that I would have relied on them too much emotionally as a friend, which my mother definitely did with me. I was an only child of an older mother. I had a lovely dad, but my mum treated me like an adult from the time I was about 6 years old. And I kind of didn't want to do that with my girls. And I think the fact that there are 2 of them means that they are the kids in a very, in inverted commas, normal way.
Yeah.
And to me, that feels healthy. And it relieves them of the burden of having to having to be the sole focus of my love and attention. And also I think, if you've had kids in a slightly alternative way, it can only help for them to have someone down the line who they can turn to and say, what the hell did she think she was doing? This is absurd.
Oh yes, but let me tell you, even in traditional ways, they will think, what the hell were they doing? This is absurd. Yeah. So
everybody says that. Well, it's because I'm an only child. I never had that, so I had to write a memoir.
Well, it has to be different. But so that was really my next question. I know you've probably been asked this 100 different ways, but I don't want to ask, why did you write the book? What I want to ask is, if the book hadn't been written, then what?
Do you know, I think I wouldn't have forced myself to properly think through what it is I had done. And I think the very least I owed my girls was a fully realized account of how they came to be born. And I think I still had quite a lot of shame in my system as I sat down to write the book. And I know I did, because the first draft was returned to me by my editor, and I was told to give it another year of thought, because I was avoiding all sorts of things. And I was still deeply ashamed, and I felt that what I had done, I knew it wasn't second best, but I was still defensive about it. And so I owed it to them to sit in a chair for 2 years and deal with it. And then I owed it to them to be able to talk about it publicly. That was the main thing. I felt when people asked about the girls, I had that knee-jerk instinct to lie. And that wouldn't do. That absolutely wouldn't do. And so the quickest and the easiest way I knew to get around that was to write a book about it and be contractually obliged to publicize it in ways that I couldn't avoid. So,
it's so interesting that you say that, because it's very similar to what happened when I wrote my book. First of all, I did have an editor, but I didn't have a major publishing house behind me. But I got through the first draft and I started reading, and I'm like, oh my God, this has the right content, but it's not me. It's not my voice. It was, but it wasn't. It's what I call Rick's author voice, or Rick's speaker voice. I do this shit to myself all the time. It drives me nuts. It's like, okay, I get ready to do a new speech. It's like, okay, I just did the speaker voice. Now we got to bring it down, and we got to put the bitchy diva voice in, and then everything will be fine. But it was so interesting, because as I read the book, I'm like, okay, here's the content, but this isn't what I want people to hear. This isn't what I want my girls to read. This isn't what I want, my ex-wife to understand. It isn't any of this, and it isn't what I want people to learn from this, even though the intent was, quite honestly, it was my cleansing. It was like, okay, get this out of my system. And it just happens that now it's helping people, do their thing. And it sounds like that's exactly what it was for you. The same thing. It's like, I could really care less if nobody ever read the book except my kids.
Oh, totally. It's two things. You have to get to a position where you are comfortable with all of this, so that so that your children can be comfortable with it. That's the bare minimum, right? Yep. And then on top of that, I got to a point where I was kind of proud. I was proud of them. I was proud of myself for having gone through this. And it wasn't a question of trying to disguise how difficult it was. Quite the opposite. I think you have to own to the fact that it's tricky, and it takes years of thought, and there are all these pockets of shame that you have to negotiate. And then you do it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I even came close to not doing it, because I was worried about what people were going to think. And that's the takeaway for me. And the thing as a parenting lesson I want to give to my girls, which is, there are going to be times in your life when people are going to try and make you feel ashamed of something in your life. And probably this is going to be one of those things. And you just have to crush through it.
Yep. It's interesting, because you and I have some very similar parallels. You did this whole becoming a parent late in life. I came out late in life. And one of the things that I feel like it gave me the best piece of my life so far was, I'm going to be okay. Even if I'm late to this quote game, so to speak, I'm still going to be okay. And that's the big difference.
That is. But it must be, from your point of view, that's interesting, because I wonder if you felt like a kind of two-headed shame, which was on the one hand, the shame of being gay, whichever, and then on the other hand, the shame of not having been okay enough about it to have come out sooner. I mean, like
I actually did. I actually came out at 19, and then because of some pressure from parents and stuff, I went back in the closet. And I'm okay with that, because I've said this numerous times on the podcast. I don't actually believe I'd be having this conversation with you if I had come out at 19, because I came out right at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic. And I was so naive and sexually not ready that I would have probably just said, oh yeah, let's get naked and do this. And I wouldn't even know what I was doing. And then boom. But what I think the gift is here is I came out exactly when I was meant to. And you decided to have these beautiful girls exactly when you were meant to. Yes, there was a pressure, and there was like, okay, it's either now or never, shit, let's get this done. But I think each of us, when we can embrace when we do what we do, it's exactly when we're meant to do it. And when we get hung up in the other areas, whether it's because somebody else is like, oh, did you wait so long? Or don't you think you should wait a few more years? It has nothing to do with us. We're doing it exactly when we're meant to be there and doing it.
You're totally right. And it's funny on those little voices. One of the responses I've had to this book is that, so I happened to freak out when I was 37. I mean, and so I had the girls when I was 39, and I've had women in their sort of early to mid 40s who have got very cross because they've said, well, why have you identified 37 as the time to freak out? 43 is the time you should. And it's like, listen, ladies, call it when you want. I'm just saying that these are the options that are available to you at whichever point you happen to fall off into the deep end.
Elizabeth Gilbert said something, and I don't know whether it was a Eat, Pray, Love interview I heard her on, or maybe it's something she says in Big Magic, but she said, I've had so many people tell me, oh my God, you've inspired me. Now I'm going to go do my own Eat, Pray, Love. It was Eat, Pray, Love journey. And she goes, I don't want to be held responsible for that.
Really? Yeah.
And that's the way I feel. It's like, okay, yeah, I want you to, if my book inspires you to do something, but please don't hold me responsible for you doing the journey because you think you got to do it when I did it. There is no magic. The magic moment is when it's your magic moment, plain and simple, Yeah. And that's one of the biggest messages I feel like I've given my daughters is, yeah, dad came out late in life. Things could have been a lot different. But you know what? It happened when it was meant to happen. And look at what I've now been able to do. Look at where I've gone. And so don't get hung up on where somebody else is or where you think you need to be because of where somebody else is. When it's your moment, it's your moment. And and those moments come every day, quite honestly.
Totally. And also, of course, that, in the case of your particular journey, we all know that the hardest thing in life is to change course. Like that is the difficult thing.
Yeah. Well, the same in yours. I mean, you changed course in a huge way. It's like, okay, I'm going to be mommy now. And boom.
Yeah, and I felt so embarrassed. I really did. It was so weird. Like the social pressure I felt on me to not turn into the woman who is suddenly desperate for a child. It felt aesthetically displeasing.
Yep.
And then I thought, am I really going to let that criteria dictate the next 50 years of my life? But it did. It felt like a feminist failure. I didn't think I was supposed to be feeling this. So
that's
that
so interesting.
Took 6 months of, dealing with.
But, here's what's interesting. You talk about, your feminist failure. I talk about my failure of not coming out sooner. And I've shared this on the podcast a couple of times too, but I can come from a slightly different angle. I was working with a client a couple of days ago, and he's in his 50s, and he's just beginning to really navigate the dating journey over last year. And he's like, I don't really get it. These younger guys are really into me. They're 30 something and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, you know what? You're not meant to get it. Just go with it because it's going to guide you where you need to go. That's the thing. When we question and we sit there and we keep continuing to question all this stuff, that's when we're going to screw ourselves up. And I think just being able to say, okay, yep, I'm going to become a mommy and here we go, or I'm coming out of the closet. It's very interesting. In fact, I have so many young people, this will blow your mind. Well, probably won't blow your mind, but you'll relate to it, who are in their 20s and they're picking up my book, Frankly, My Dear, I'm Gay, A Late Bloomer's Guide to Coming Out. Okay, so there's the key subtitle, A Late Bloomer's Guide. And at 24, they're like, yeah, your book has helped me so much because I'm so late to the game. I just want the shit out of them and go, please, please, please. But to them, because they're coming out at 8, 9, 10, 12, 14 these days, they are late to the game. So, of course, I don't think that would really work in this whole let's conceive a child. Oh, I'm late to the game. I'm 18. No. We don't want to go that route. But,
well, except that, the average age, I think in this country, the average age of first-time motherhood is something like 29, 28, 29. Yep. So I know women who at 34 are doing this. And I find that internal disapproving mechanism of mine being triggered. And I'm like, 34, what is wrong with you? You've got, why are you jumping the gun? And of course, which is ridiculous.
Well, but it's the same old stuff that anything, especially those of us that are gay and lesbian, it's like, it's because society says this is what you're supposed to be.
Exactly.
You know, and this is where the bullshit arises. And this is why I stand so firmly on this platform that I get to share of living a life uncloseted is about making the bold move to live life on your terms. It's your terms. Nobody else's but yours. And I think it's so important to go down that route. So what's next? I mean, I love this book. I mean, you and I could both write multiple books on all this sort of stuff, but what's next for you?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. I mean, I would quite like to take a break from writing about myself and thinking about I feel like I should sit down and write a biography of Churchill or something, just to sort of cleanse my palate. But I don't know. I have a day job. I write for a newspaper. There's there may be a TV show in the works of this story. I don't know. I mean, these things tend not to come to fruition. I hope it does. And I'm just hanging out with my girls and, trying, even this language makes me cringe, but I'm trying to be slightly less goal oriented now, and I think that's another thing about having had them at this point. It's just like, and relax, just chill out for a minute.
Yes, there's a friend of mine who that is her mantra, and relax. That's what she says all the time. It's just, and relax. And she has taught me that very well, because I'm like you. It's like, no goals. Okay, well then what? And it's like, no, Rick, you need to learn the and relax place, because I could go. And
and you're doing it wrong when you scream relax. Sometimes I'm like, relax. I shriek at my children. I'm like, okay, that's a mixed message.
Oh, yes. And there's so many more times that you're going to want to scream that in the years ahead. Trust me. And I know you've heard that from many, many people. I don't want to be one of those people that says, just wait. Because that's one of the things that bug me most about parenting is, just wait. Or, well, let me tell you what to, I'm like, okay, that's nice stuff that you're sharing, but can I be a little surprised once in a while?
Yes, right.
Can I just kind of figure some of this out myself, And of course, as soon as I said that, then of course, because I have 2 daughters, I got blessed with, guess where they were when they had their first periods? They were with dad, not with mom. Both of them with dad. Now, luckily, of course, once the first one happened, I'm like, okay, I'm prepared for this. But then I really wasn't prepared for the second one, because the second one was a whole different episode of complete freak out in the middle of the night, trying to get to somewhere that I could get stuff. And I was just,
oh my gosh, I have never even given this a second thought. I
sorry, didn't mean to roll you forward 10 years.
Just trying to get to 4. Yeah.
It's amazing the stuff that you're like, okay, I didn't even think about that. And
then you forget from your all the things that I'd forgotten, like weeing in public places. And the minute they did it, I was like, oh my God, I remember my mother holding me in parking lots, weeing onto her shoes, because it's like all this stuff comes flooding back.
Yeah. And then there's going to be the first dates, the first breakups. It's like, okay, the first time you catch them sneaking out of the house and go, really? Who are you?
I'm not cool with any of this. Yeah.
But, and then when they say, oh yeah, I've been smoking pot for 8 months. I'm like, okay, I told you to tell me it's okay to tell me this stuff, and you didn't. And now, of course, one of the favorite family things that happens for us is our oldest daughter, she loves wine now. She's 20 some years old. She's grown into it. She's had her journey into cocktailing and all that stuff. And then the youngest one, we've let her drink a few times. And my oldest one's like, you never let me do that. I'm like, you never said you wanted to. We've always said you could do this. And so every time it's that. Now, yours is going to be different because they're kind of the same age. So there's never going to be, there probably will be. It's like they'll have I was born first.
Oh, yeah. I see the 2-minute difference is about to become an issue.
It is. Trust me. The twins that are in our life, it's like, oh yeah, they talk that all the time. Who gets to use the car? Well, I do, because I was born first. Seriously, This is how we're going to define what gets done in the house. So, but it's so interesting. So, well, Emma, I could talk to you for hours. I think we could have so much fun just continuing to unravel the parent life and all this sort of stuff. But this has been such a cool pleasure, and I'm so excited about the book. I hope it's doing really well for you. We'll have direct links to the book and where people can buy it on the show page. And any parenting advice you want to leave someone about, or advice about taking the journey of, yes, I'm going to go live my life on my terms and have my kids, because this is what's important to me.
That's a good question. I'm trying not to. It's funny. It's exactly the thing you said about the Liz Gilbert anxiety, which is not to tell people to go and do what you did, which is not the point at all.
Yep.
It's that I think it's okay for the decision to be hard. It's supposed to be hard, and that is not an indication that it's the wrong decision. It took me 18 months of anxiety and dithering and stress to make this decision. And I think that's okay. It means that I had my children thoughtfully. And so I think the thing you have to be most prescient of is why you're making the decision and why you might not be making a decision to do some radical thing in your life. And the main takeaway I have is, to use my own example, to have a kid on your own may or may not be the right thing for you. But to not do it because your primary concern is that it will look like you're weird, or that your parents will disapprove, or that, like the thing that I worried, that it would look like I couldn't get anyone to shag me. That is not the reason to do anything or not do anything. So, my mother always used to say to me, have the courage of your insane convictions. And that has to be the end point. It has to be. However long it takes you to get there, carry on thinking about it until you do.
I love that. I love it, because it is those insane decisions that are most of the time the exact decision you're supposed to make.
They are. They generally are, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are times that people have asked me, so why did you just make the decision to come out? You had a good life. You had a great family. And it's like, because it was the most insane thing I could do to be happy.
Right. And because it's a hard road, the very fact that it keeps you awake at night for months and years, when there's an easier path that you could take, it generally means that really the choice has already been made. Somewhere in your system, that choice has been made, and you just have to get your feet to do the walking.
Absolutely. Well, that is awesome advice that nobody has to take. We're just throwing it out there.
You're right.
Don't say this because she said this is what you do. But I think it is actually really great guidance there. And I've enjoyed this conversation immensely. I'm so glad we got connected, and wishing you much, much success for, parenthood for sure.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much, Rick.
Well, thank you so much. All righty. Take care.
All right, there you have it. Another episode of Life Uncloseted has come to an end, but that's okay. We're going to be back in just a couple of days, sharing more stories, tips, tricks, and wisdom for helping you live your life uncloseted. And you know what? You can share it too. Just take a few moments if you like and if you believe in this podcast, and share it with someone you know today. Share it from your phone, go share it on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you are. Maybe even give us a rating and review, because you know what? It's all about the planet living their life uncloseted. I'm Rick Clemens, host of the show and the guy who helps you make those big, bold moves. And I hope you never stop stepping out, stepping up, and stepping in to living your life uncloseted. Catch you real soon. Take care, everyone.